Merrick had no idea how long they continued running. Panic transformed much of their flight into a blur, and even when the sharp edge of fear had worn off, he found it difficult to get his bearings in the rain and the darkness. Okay, before I go any further, I'll try and do some more uploadings of this at some point. I'm just trying to get back into the swing of it. They were deep in the Kokari wilds now, he knew. The forest's dangerous reputation had yet to prove itself, but it certainly looked unlike anything he had ever seen before. The giant trees twisted like they were frozen in the throes of agony, and a perpetual cold mist clung to the ground. It gave the forest an ominous feel, one that deepened the further they ran. One of Merrick's tutors had explained the reason for the mist, something relating to one of the region's old legends, but he couldn't recall any of the particulars. Especially now, when it took everything he had to keep pace with the seemingly tireless Logain. Hours of panicked running through the thick and uneven foliage had turned into exhausted trudging, and finally became a limping crawl. Merrick collapsed in a natural alcove formed by the roots of the foot of a fallen tree. It was an elder poplar, papery white and 10 times as wide as himself, and some unknown force had ripped it out of the ground. Massive exposed roots snaked around the alcove like giant tentacles, and a bed of thick moss and delicate white flowers grew in the shade. Dim light filtered down from overhead, and he could just barely make out the overcast sky through patches in the tree canopy. Had they been running the entire night? It seemed impossible that he had survived a second consecutive night fleeing through the wilderness. At least the storm had pettered out a few hours before. As Merrick lay there, inhaling the scent of moss, sweating and gasping for air, he felt the mist settle coolly on his skin and was grateful for it. "All spent, are you?" Logan said with annoyance, returning from a short distance ahead. Merrick suspected the man was almost as exhausted as he was. He, too, was pale and had rivulets of sweat running down his face and over his stained leather armor. Despite his heavier burden, however, he didn't seem inclined to slow his pace. Merrick was beyond caring. "I think we lost them," he gasped, still trying to catch his breath. "Are you sure?" Logan drew his belt knife and hacked viciously at one of the low-hanging root tendrils that hovered near his head. "You're a prince, aren't you? You're an important person. You might have the entire Ferelden army after you. They may have unleashed a small horde of Mabari hounds into the forest to sniff you down. They might even have mages scrying after you." He strode over to where Merrick lay and stared at him with fury in those cold eyes. "Just how safe do you feel, Your Highness?" At the moment? Not very." Logan snorted in disgust and walked away several steps. He stood there staring into the mist and bristling. "The truth," he stated, "is they're not going to come into the wilds. This is savage country, and dangerous. They'd be stupid to follow us. About as stupid as we were desperate to flee this place. Or to flee this way." "That makes me feel so much better." "Good." Logan's calm tone was icy. "Because you're on your own from this point." "You're just gonna leave me out here?" "I got you out safely, didn't I? You're here. You're alive." A chill ran down Merrick's spine and settled uncomfortably in his gut. "You think that's what your father intended?" Logan's eyes went wide. With 2 quick steps, he was on top of Merrick, hauling him up from the moss and throwing him against the fungus-covered tree. Merrick gasped. The wind knocked out of him as Logan lifted a threatening fist. It hovered, as if he wasn't willing to actually punch Merrick, but judging from the furious expression on his face, he wanted to. "You shut up about him," Logan hissed. "You're the one who got him killed. You don't get to tell me what to do. You can't knight me and make me throw my life away for you." Merrick coughed, trying to regain his breath. "You think I meant for any of this to happen? I didn't want your father to die. I'm so sorry." Logan went rigid. "Oh, you're sorry? You're sorry?" Merrick saw the punch coming and closed his eyes. His chin exploded into a ball of white pain, and he bit down hard on his tongue. Metallic-tasting blood filled his mouth as he collapsed on the moss below, too exhausted to put up any resistance. "How wonderful that you're sorry!" Logan raged, towering over him. "I watched my father die, along with everyone he promised to protect. But how much better is it now that I know you're sorry?" Tearing himself away, he stalked several feet off and stood there with his back turned, fists clenched at his side. "What the..." "Oh." Sorry, guys. I'll try and do this again. Merrick gasped and spat out blood and saliva, much of it dribbling down his chin. His jaw throbbed like he was about to fall off. Gritting his teeth and sucking back the blood welling out of his tongue, he forced himself to sit up. I watched my mother murdered right in front of me, and I couldn't do a thing to stop it. Logan made no sign he was even listening. Feeling shaky and weak, Merrick continued to speak. I was running from her killers when I met you in the woods. I had no idea that you weren't going to just throw me to the wolves once you found out who I was. I was going to go my own way, but you convinced me to follow you. Merrick held out his hand in supplication. Why did you do that? You knew I was being chased. You knew there was danger. Logan didn't answer. He remained with his back turned, and for several minutes all he could do was cut at low-hanging roots with his knife and toss them aside. Merrick couldn't tell if Logan was ignoring him or just thinking. Eventually, Merrick wiped his mouth gingerly with the back of his hand. The flow of blood had lessened, though his jaw still hurt, and his ears were ringing. With the effort, he pulled himself back to his feet. I wish I'd known earlier about your father, Merrick continued. He was willing to give up his life to save me. And why? Same reason he let all those poor people out bet, when where he belonged was with the rebel army. He was a great man. Even I could see that. That's why I knighted him. Tears welled up in his eyes and his voice became hoarse. My mother was great, too. Let me tell you, if I had the chance to say goodbye to her, I wouldn't have wasted it. Logan did not move, or even look at him. It was obvious nothing Merrick said was going to get through to him. Merrick wiped the tears from his eyes and nodded. But I get it. I don't expect you to stay and help me. I really don't. You need to go back to the camp, see if anyone survived. If I were you, I'd want to get back to my people. How can I not understand that? He wiped the last smears of blood from his chin. So, thank you for saving me. With that, he straightened the torn and wet coat and left. The boots were still his good ones, he figured. He had the dagger the sister had given him and was not completely helpless. With a bit of luck, he could find a route back out of the forest. Maybe he would run into some passing merchant caravan. The dwarves came this far south on the way to Gorin, didn't they? It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. At this point, he had little choice but to try. Merrick trudged across the treacherous terrain, leaving Logan well behind him. The mist made traveling difficult. He couldn't see where he was stepping most of the time, and his boots got caught between gnarled roots or in small depressions in the road. Or in the mud. Sorry. Eventually he cut down one of the low tree branches, making himself a stick to help him find firmer ground in the mist. The forest around him seemed to be getting thicker and darker if possible, when he realized he really had no idea even which direction he was going. He couldn't tell where the sun was, as he could barely see the sky. For all he knew, he could be heading further south into the wilds. As he stood there, scratching his head in confusion, he heard steps behind him. He turned to find Logan approaching. Merrick had to admit that he had never felt quite so relieved to see anyone, especially Logan, in his formidable leather armor, stepping as easily in the mist as he might have on even ground. The man certainly didn't look happy. Those icy blue eyes glared at Merrick as if to say, I'm going to regret this. Merrick waited for Logan to get near. Logan didn't say anything right away, but grimaced and unslung his bow, then adjusted the half-full quiver on his back. When he looked up again, he held up a single finger. 1. You have a way with words. Really? You'd be the first to say that. Logan ignored him, holding up a second finger. 2. I don't imagine what my father meant for you to get away just to die like an idiot in the wilds. Which is exactly what would happen if I didn't help you. No, I'm fine. You don't owe me anything. Logan grunted noncommittedly. With a quick motion, he pulled an arrow from his quiver and fired it right past Merrick's head. Merrick was so startled he didn't know what to think. He stepped back and then jumped as he noticed something writhing on the tree behind him. He jumped even further when he realized it was a shiny black snake, at least as long as large as his arm. The arrow pierced it about a foot behind his head, staking it to the tree where it frantically writhed. Logan stepped up to it, drawing his belt knife and cutting off its head with some difficulty. Angry red blood gushed from its neck, and its convulsions slowed. Yanking at the arrow, Logan pulled the snake corpse down from the branches and turned back to Merrick. We sometimes saw those outside the wilds. Silent crawlers. Poisonous, but tasty enough if you can ignore the smell. Oh, Merrick said, nonplussed. So I'm going to see you out of the wilds and get you back to the rebels. He looked at Merrick sternly. Once that's done, we're through. Do you understand? Yes. Then no thanking me. I don't want any reward. Right. And I'm not calling you Your Highness. Please don't. Logan scowled deepened like he had been half hoping for an argument. Since there was none forthcoming, he waved vaguely in the direction Merrick had been heading. At least you were walking in the right direction. Accidentally, I bet. Are you hungry? Merrick eyed the long, shiny snake corpse dangling from Logan's hand dubiously, but his stomach growled before he could answer. And let's find something else besides a snake to eat, and a place to light a damned fire. He brushed by Merrick and headed off, not waiting to see if Merrick followed. For the next 3 days, the pair of them traveled the deep forest of the Kokari Wilds. It was slow going, considering that Logan didn't want to backtrack, and was instead leading Merrick west. Despite what he told Merrick, Logan wasn't convinced the men that after them wouldn't follow them into the dense forest. At the very least, the pursuers might leave men stationed just outside the wilds, hoping that he and Merrick had hidden within the less dangerous fringe area and might be forced to come out soon. Of course, that assumed they were even aware the two of them had fled into the wilds. People had escaped the camp in all directions, and no soldier who had seen them face to face survived to tell of it. Still, Logan believed in assuming the worst. Despite a difficult traveling through rough terrain, he thought it best to get as far from the hills as they possibly could. Shelter proved to be their most immediate issue. Thankfully, the woods were full of fallen ancient trees, sometimes toppled in large groups that made Logan wonder just what sort of force could do this. His mind turned to tales of dragons, but there had not actually been any dragons, even seen south of the Waking Sea, since they had been hunted to near extinction long ago. Not that there couldn't be other giant creatures lurking in the wilds. Merrick had heard tales of things like great savage bears as large as a house, and the blue-skinned ogres with horns as long as a man's arm. He supposed they should just be as thankful that those weren't anywhere in evidence at the moment either. I cannot talk. The fallen trees offered cover for the night, and for the first 2 nights, there was no rain. Logan kept the fire going as long as he dared while Merrick shivered in his sleep nearby. The fire wasn't enough to keep the persistent mist at bay, which meant it clung to the clothes and skin and left one feeling constantly damp and chilled. Each morning, Merrick had been more and more difficult to awaken, his skin pale and teeth chattering. Luckily, that was their biggest challenge. There was plenty of game to be found, and Logan was able to detect the larger predators quickly enough to give them a wide berth. Merrick, for his part, was proving difficult to hate. He kept pace and had yet to complain not about being hungry, or exhausted, or anything else. He also did as he was told, and had saved himself more than once from blundering into danger by responding immediately to Logan's barked orders. If he had one flaw, it was the talking. The man chattered constantly and amiably about almost anything. If it wasn't his amazement at the size of the trees, it was assessment of the size of the wild, or his recollection of the lore on the chasing people that were supposed to live in the forest. Logan listened quietly to the constant prattle, wishing nothing more for them than for him to shut up. After the second night, Merrick became quieter, and Logan was disgusted to discover that he actually missed the sound. It must have been easy for the man to make friends, Logan surmised. Even exhausted and half covered in filth, Merrick had a natural easy charm. As Merrick was the favored son of a queen, whom Logan's father had all but worshipped from afar, Logan truly wanted to despise him. He had every reason to despise him, but the truth was, he just couldn't maintain the cold fury he had felt before, and that was almost worse than anything else. On the 3rd night, it rained. Freezing without a fire, Logan and Merrick huddled under an outcropping of rock, their breath coming out in plumes through chattering teeth. That night, the wolves made their appearance. Tentatively, the beasts hovered nearby, gathering their courage before making any sort of an attack. Several times, Logan sent them running with a shot from his bow, only to have them edge back into sight later on. Logan had only so many arrows, and no way of making more, so he conserved what he had, and used them only when there was no other choice. By the time morning came, the wolves had decided there was less vigilant prey to be found elsewhere. Logan was weary, chilled to the bone, and became more than a little concerned when he found Merrick shivering and unable to wake up. So pale he was almost white, Merrick could at best be roused to a strange state when he would utter delirious nonsense through his chattering teeth. Logan built a fire, no mean feat considering that mist and rain had drenched almost everything. He dug for dead wood, searching for dry moss and twigs hidden away out of sight, and then came frustrating hours of smoke and embers and him nearly nodding off while trying to focus. When the flame finally caught, he could have jumped for joy. and would have given much to listen to Merrick asking 20 different questions about how he managed it. He settled for finessing the fire into a sizable blaze. More damp wood was added, and more moss, and more sticks. And after those dried and caught fire, he repeated the process. Eventually he had what he needed, a crackling pyre that gave off more heat than smoke. He pulled Merrick as close to the flames as he dared, and sat nearby, trying to keep an eye out for the wolf pack's return. After a time, the warm glow made his lids heavy, and he fell asleep. Logan woke up hours later, discovering that Merrick was not only already awake, but also tending the fire. He was pale and shaky, but mobile. Merrick nodded to Logan, silently acknowledging his thanks, and with a slightly embarrassed grin. But Logan only frowned back. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you put me through?" he demanded. Merrick rubbed his arm, shivering. "I'm very happy not to be dead, and that you didn't leave me here to freeze. The wolves would have eaten you long before you froze." "Well, that's something." Logan turned to leave. "I'm going to hunt while I can. I'd appreciate it if you managed to not freeze while I'm gone. Do you think you could do that?" He didn't wait for a response, and felt pleased by Merrick's slightly injured expression. On the fourth day, Logan realized they were being followed. The wolves had not returned, which was odd. After a time of having the strange sensation of being watched, he heard something out in the bushes. Whoever was out there, and he did think it was a who, since he doubted a predator would have spent so long stalking them, was skilled. Try as Logan might, he could not spot anyone in the shadows. He held up a hand, quieting Merrick. "Don't look now," he muttered, "but I don't think we're alone any longer." To Merrick's credit, he didn't look. "Are you sure?" "Well, it's difficult to hear much with you blathering on like you do." "I'm not blathering!" "Really? That's no wonder you nearly froze to death the way you spend all your energy moving your mouth." Their eyes glanced around nervously, without making it obvious what they were doing. Merrick made a subtle motion to his left. Logan followed it, not quite believing that Merrick could be capable of spotting something first. Then he saw it, just ahead. In the deep shadows between two of the fallen trees, 2 points of light glinted at them, like a cat's eyes as it watched you in the dark. Like elf eyes. "Blast!" Logan swore, his panic catching him off guard. In a single motion, he shoved Merrick to the ground and unslung the bow from his shoulder. As he dove for cover, he heard an arrow whistling toward him. It sank into his shoulder with considerable force, sending him stumbling backward with a grunt of pain. "Logan!" Merrick shouted. He leaped up and ran to where Logan was sprawled, gasping when he saw the arrow that had passed almost completely through Logan's shoulder. Bright blood stained the tall grass. Looking around, his eyes wide of fear, Merrick pulled out his dagger. "Run!" Logan raced at him, trying to clutch at the arrow's shaft and get up at the same time. But it was too late. Elves materialized out of the shadows around them, running towards them with barely a sound. They were dressed in hunting leather, their foreheads tattooed in vivid color patterns representing their pagan gods. The expression in their bright alien eyes said murder. Some held bows trained, while others held amber-colored ironwood blades in hand. Merrick raised his dagger, but even as he did, a thick net landed over them. The elves were on them, grabbing at arms and legs and shouting angrily in their strange language. Logan struggled, hissing in pain as the weight of the net forced the arrow further into his shoulder, but it was futile. Merrick thrashed in the net next to him until there was a loud thumping noise, and Merrick slumped to the ground. A moment later, held down by many strong hands, Logan felt something hard slam his head, and he too slipped into the darkness. Okay, you guys, I'm going to end this part, and next time we will continue with Chapter 3 and hopefully finish it. I hope to see you guys next time, and I hope if you guys enjoyed it, tell your friends about it because I could really use the support. I'll see you guys next time.